Okay, so to finish the last thing or two about national parks, is the challenge is reducing the impact of human activities while allowing people to still see these great sites. If you ever have the opportunity to visit any of our national parks, I highly encourage you to do so. Now, this is different from national wildlife refuges and national wilderness areas. So a national wildlife refuge is the only federal public lands managed for the primary purpose of protecting wildlife. And it's managed by Fish and Wildlife Service. National wilderness area is the intent of preserving large tracts of intact ecosystems or landscapes. It has limited human use and is roadless, so there's no roads in those wilderness areas. So one of the national wildlife refuges that I've spent a lot of time in is Chincoteague down in Virginia, and this is where the wild ponies live. We vacationed there the last 4 or 5 years, and they do the big pony swim where they swim them across and put some of the young up for auction to manage the herds. The herds are managed differently depending on if it's the Virginia side or the Maryland side. And I won't go into that here, but if you have any questions about Chincoteague and the wild ponies, we've spent quite a bit of time down there. So federal regulations, the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, mandates an environmental assessment of all projects involving federal money or federal permits. It was established in 1969. It was created to start an environmental regulatory process designed to ensure protection of our nation's resources. In order to, the process has to go through an EIS, which is an environmental impact statement. It outlines the scope and purpose of the project. It describes the environmental context. It suggests alternative approaches and analyzes the environment impact of the alternative. It essentially allows, it's making sure you go through a process of seeing what this project is and analyzing the environmental impact of any such project. And anything that involves federal money or federal permits has to go through this. Residential land, suburban is areas surrounding metropolitan centers with low population densities. And then exurban, which is similar to suburban areas, but not connected to any central city or densely populated area. We are somewhere, I think, somewhere between exurban and rural. I was sort of trying to figure out what would be a good example of exurban. Suburban would be truly outside of a city, so looking more towards things like Morristown or places that are much closer to New York City. We're significantly far from New York City and Philadelphia. And we definitely have components of a rural neighborhood, but we could also have components that are exurban. So what is urban sprawl? Urban sprawl is the creation of urbanized areas that spread into rural areas and remove the clear boundaries between the two. There are 4 main causes of urban sprawl in the U.S. We'll look at those. There's some facts here that between 1992 and 1997, U.S. farmland being converted to residential use at a rate of 1.2 million acres per year. The reason is we have this new dependence on automobiles, and each family has access to more land. The 4 causes of urban sprawl in the U.S., automobiles and highway construction, looking at living costs, urban blight, which is the degradation of the built and social environments of the city that often accompanies and accelerates migration to the suburbs. We'll look at that on the next slide. And then government policies influence urban sprawl, things like the Highway Trust Fund and zoning and the Federal Housing Administration. So different government policies play into effect here. Zoning is a planning tool to separate industry and business from residential neighborhoods. The Highway Trust Fund began by the Highway Revenue Act in 1956 and funded by the federal gasoline tax pays for the construction and maintenance of roads, which makes it easier to sprawl out of the cities. And then looking at things like the Federal Housing Administration to allow people to apply for federally subsidized mortgages that could offer low interest rates. A lot of people that could otherwise not afford a house to purchase one for homes that were financially low-risk areas. So looking at these two positive feedback loops in relation to urban sprawl, if we look at the top one, that's looking at urban blight. So it's the degradation of the built and social environments of the city that often accompanies and accelerates migration to the suburbs. So population shifts to the suburbs, that's what kicks it off. Tax revenues decline. Services then are cut because we don't need to have this bus route if no one is living there. So there's fewer customers, so therefore businesses leave. Then there's neighborhood decline because the neighborhood's declining. Population is shifting out of the urban areas. So that's one positive feedback loop. Positive doesn't necessarily mean good. Remember, positive just means that it's reinforcing the next thing. The other one is referred to as induced demand. Increasing the supply of a good causes demand to grow. So the use of gasoline tax money to build highways leads to more suburbs and traffic, so then more money on the highways is spent to alleviate the congestion. So increased gasoline tax revenues, we have more highway construction, those suburbs expand, there's more congestion, there's longer commutes, so therefore there's more gas used, so there's more tax revenue, so we can construct more highways. I mean, we see that cycle. Again, it's a positive feedback loop. Doesn't mean that it's a good thing, it just means that it's influencing itself in a positive manner. It's increasing things. And finally, we have smart growth, the 10 basic principles of smart growth as identified by the EPA. And these are all strategies that encourage the development of sustainable, healthy communities. Things, mixed land uses, so mixing retail, education, recreation, and businesses, creating a range of housing opportunities, so providing housing for people of all incomes, levels, so that we have a more diversity. Create walkable neighborhoods, mixing land use, reducing speed of traffic, encouraging businesses to build stores directly up to the sidewalk, putting parking lots behind buildings so it encourages walking, people use their cars less. It also creates opportunities for civic engagement. If you're walking, you're more inclined to interact with your neighbors, and that usually has environmental benefits. Encourage community and stakeholder collaboration in development decisions. There's no single right answer to any of these problems, but bringing people together to help solve what the best problems are, what the best solutions are. Take advantage of compact building design, multi-story buildings and parking garages as opposed to sprawling lots to reduce a neighborhood's footprint. Foster distinctive, attractive communities with a strong sense of place. Things like New Orleans French Quarter has a strong sense of place. I would argue that our downtown Clinton, because of its proximity to the mill, has a strong sense of place. If that mill was 20 miles out in the middle of nowhere and not attached to the little town of Clinton, I doubt it would be nearly as famous as it is. But because it parks itself right on the edge of a little thriving town, it gives Clinton a strong sense of place. Preserve open space, farmland, natural beauty, and critical environmental areas. Working farmland is a source of fresh local produce and provide opportunities for recreation and enjoyment. Provide a variety of transportation choices. Transportation-oriented development, TOD is the abbreviation, attempts to focus dense residential and retail development around stops for public transportation. Things like bicycle racks and safe roads and pleasant sidewalks. Car sharing things like Zipcar are all different things that factor into transportation choices. Strengthen and direct development towards existing communities. Development that fills in vacant lots within existing communities rather than expanding into new land outside the city is called infill. Cities like Portland, Oregon have urban growth boundaries, so you can't develop outside the city. And then 10, make development decisions predictable, fair, and cost-effective. One reason suburban developments in regions often look the same is that standardized designs allow developers to move rapidly through the permitting process. A streamlined approval process that encourages smart growth could increase the number of individualized plans rather than promoting this cookie-cutter development. There's no individual new development or neighborhood plan that is likely to incorporate all of these ideas, but smart growth can have an important environmental benefits. Looking at these different things and factoring them in allows us to make good environmental decisions about how we grow our urban areas.